Slavery is the exact opposite of liberty. They cannot coexist. Rights pertain only to individual men. There's no such thing as minority rights, states' rights, civil rights, or any other form of collective rights. The initiation of force against the collective is really the initiation of force against the individuals of which the collective is composed, because the collective has no existence apart from the individuals who compose it. Therefore, there are no collective rights. There are only the rights which every individual has to be free from the coercive actions of others. Morally, each man owns himself, and he has the right to do anything which doesn't violate another man's right of self-ownership. The only way a right can be violated is by coercion. This is why society, in harmony with the requirements of a man's nature, must be based on the rule of non-initiation of force. It must be a laissez-faire society. Laissez-faire means let people do as they please, meaning let everyone leave others alone to do as they choose. A laissez-faire society is a society of non-interference, a mind-your-own-business, live-and-let-live society. It means freedom for each individual to manage his own affairs in any way he pleases, not just in the realm of economics, but in every area of his life. If he restricts his behavior to his own affairs, it's obvious he can't initiate the use of force against anyone else. In a laissez-faire society, no man or group of men would dictate anyone's lifestyle, or force them to pay taxes to a state bureaucracy, or prohibit them from making any voluntary trades they wanted. There will likely never be a society completely free from the initiation of physical force by some men against others, because men can act irrationally if they choose to. A laissez-faire society is not a utopia in which the initiation of violence is impossible. Rather, it's a society which does not institutionalize the initiation of force, and in which there are means for dealing with aggression justly when it does occur. Can men ever achieve a laissez-faire society? Many people have an unshakable conviction that anything so ideal could never become a practical reality. They can't explain why they're so sure of this. They just feel an unreasoned certainty that it must be so. What is behind this reasonless certainty that the good, that is liberty, is unachievable? The answer lies in the inverted morality of tradition: altruism. Altruism is the philosophical doctrine which holds that anything which is done out of concern for the welfare of others is good, but that it is evil if motivated by a concern for self. Some variation of this doctrine has been a basic part of nearly all of the world's religions and philosophies for man's entire history. One of the most common of religious tenets is that selfishness is evil, and that only a selfless concern for the needs of others will win favor with God and man. Sacrifice is held to be among the greatest of virtues, simply because the beneficiaries of the sacrifice are others, and the loser is self. It isn't hard to see one of the reasons for the long-standing prominence of altruistic doctrines. Religious and political leaders can collect much more substantial offerings and taxes from people whom these leaders succeed in convincing that it's their moral duty to give as much as possible in sacrificial service to others than they can from people who live for their own rational self-interest. This something-for-nothing doctrine, altruism, is the moral ideal of human parasites. Altruism is an inverted morality, a morality of death. It teaches man that his interests are opposed to the interest of everyone else, and that the only moral thing he can do is to sacrifice his interests. This means that whatever is practical and beneficial for a man is immoral, and conversely, whatever is moral for him is impractical and destructive of his values. To the extent that a man is committed to some version of altruism, he can be either practical and immoral, or moral and impractical. He cannot be both moral and practical at the same time, and his self-respect and honesty hang in the balance. This artificial dichotomy between the moral and the practical splits man in two and sets him against himself. To the extent he makes himself worthy to live by sacrificing his values, he makes himself unable to live. To the extent he makes himself able to live by keeping and using his values, he makes himself unworthy to live. No man can fully practice such a code. If he did, it would kill him. For those who accept a morality based on altruism, their only protection from this belief is hypocrisy. They give it lip service, but practice it only so far as it is religiously and socially required to keep up a good front. This is the cause of most of the hypocrisy in our culture. Altruism makes hypocrisy necessary in order to live. A society full of hypocrisy is headed for the crematorium. The moral-practical dichotomy not only necessitates hypocrisy, it also gives all the advantages to evil, since the good is by virtue of its goodness incurably impractical for life on earth. If the evil and the practical are one and the same, then evil must always win. According to the altruist philosophy, evil holds all the cards, and man can hope for very little improvement in his life or in his society. Of course, people who hold the moral-practical dichotomy seldom consciously realize what they believe. They just know that whatever is right and good seems somehow unworkable, at least on any major scale. The idea of a laissez-faire society, that is, a society of non-interference, leaves them unmoved because it seems so impractical. But the morality of altruism is exactly opposite to the facts of man's nature. In reality, the only thoughts and actions which are in man's self-interest are rational ones, and there's never any conflict of interest between men who are behaving rationally. Sacrifice harms not only the man who makes the sacrifice, but also the man who accepts it. It is, therefore, inevitably detrimental. Acting in one's rational self-interest is always right. So the moral and the practical are simply two sides of the same coin. Since moral actions are inherently practical and pro-life, immoral actions are always impractical and anti-life. Evil, i.e. anti-life behavior, is, by its nature, weak and can only survive by the support good men can be misled into giving it. It follows, therefore, that a laissez-faire society is both practical and attainable. If a laissez-faire society is attainable, why haven't men established one before now? The answer is that essentially good people have prevented it by their unwitting support of slavery. The majority of people throughout history have accepted the idea that it was both proper and necessary for some men to coercively rule over others. Most of these people weren't basically bad, and probably only a few of them have had a lust for power. But they have held a terribly wrong idea, which has caused them to support a social system that institutionalizes slavery and violence. It is this idea, that it is proper and or necessary for some men to coercively govern others, which is the idea of a government, that has prevented the establishment of a laissez-faire society and which has been responsible for incalculable human suffering and waste in the form of political and religious persecutions, taxes, regulations, conscription, slavery, wars, despotisms, etc., etc. To achieve a laissez-faire society, it's only necessary to enable enough people to change this idea in their minds. All that is required for the defeat of evil is that good men stop their unwitting support of it. There's a great and growing conflict in our world between those who want to be free and those who want to rule, together with those who want to be ruled. This great conflict has been taking shape for centuries, but the vast majority of people have never understood what it was all about because they haven't seen that the issue was freedom versus slavery, because they have believed that men must be governed. Most people have been, however unwittingly and apathetically, on the side of slavery. Until recently, no more than a tiny handful of individuals have realized what freedom means and how necessary it is for man's happiness and well-being. The great conflict between freedom and slavery, though it has taken many forms, finds its main expression in a conflict between two powerful and opposing human institutions: the free market and government. The establishment of a laissez-faire society depends on the outcome of the war between these two institutions, a war whose most crucial battles are fought on the field of ideas.